I'm here with Brien Foerster and Andrew Finck. What's like the latest thing that's been going on with the skulls, like the elongated skulls?
We've had nothing for 2 years because of COVID. Everything's been shut down. My major connection to getting samples died of COVID about a month ago. All the museums have been closed. Most of Peru's been shut down for quite a long time. So things are only slowly getting to normal now. But yeah, so there's nothing recent, but I can give you a summary of what we did find. Yeah, so we tested in total 20 skulls from the Paracas culture, all dating from between 2,500 years old to about 2,000 years old. And of the 20, only 3 of them, in terms of their maternal haplogroup, which is the mother's DNA, showed to be South American.
Only 3. Oh, okay.
3, yeah. 2 of them turned out to be unknown, which means that the DNA didn't match anything in the global database of Homo sapiens sapiens.
That's interesting.
And the other ones are most closely related to DNA of elongated skulls found around the Black Sea area.
Right. Have you found any recent ones in back catalogs or in storage that have made it to light recently, that have added to the museums that you have and that you supported?
Well, about 2.5 years ago, we had 2 of them. We took like 100 samples from the 2 of them under very sterile conditions in a dentist's laboratory in Lima, done by a forensic dentist. So, everything was completely sterile. Everyone, of course, was wearing, gear to avoid any possibility of contamination, etc. And those samples were taken to one laboratory in Canada, and another laboratory in Los Angeles, actually at UCLA.
Okay.
And the results, actually, they were able to extract, for the first time, they were able to extract nuclear DNA, which is paternal. And neither of those 2 skulls matched anything known, which, was very curious. So nothing from South America, nothing from the Black Sea area, nothing, simply it said unknown, unable to match with anything that we have.
So I
That's
always hear
wild.
about the skulls, but you never hear about like the skeletal remains. Like did like are there any examples of the full skeleton with the head attached?
Not with the head attached, no.
So then like do
Actually,
we
there is.
know if they were bigger than normal people or not? I mean, like their head certainly is bigger.
Yeah, we've been able to analyze the femur bone for its length, and then you can extrapolate from that. And it turns out that they were between 5'8" and 6'2", which is very tall for an indigenous Peruvian person, because even modern day Peruvian people average about 5'4", 5'6".
Sure.
So they would have been relative giants. At least the original population would have been, which is, that's quite curious.
Yeah.
Okay, so you do have femur bones like next to or I mean you've found bones enough to be able to determine height with the skulls.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that echoes of stories in North America that Hugh Newman and Jim Vieira are looking at with some of those giant remains. Makes you wonder how connected those 2 are. I think some of those, they said the jaw bones on some of those have to fit around the jaw of a normal man. And the skull you could put over your head. So we're talking pretty big skulls, and none of those remains are available for study, but pretty big femurs, elongated skulls, could be more to this other genetic group and multiple genetic groupings.
And I also thought it was interesting with the elongated skulls how they don't have as many teeth, right? Like they don't have as many molars that you've found.
No, they have the normal. They have the normal number of teeth. They don't have canine teeth though. So unlike us, they don't have canines. They're simply the same as the other two teeth in the row.
So would that suggest maybe they didn't eat as much meat or any meat?
It that could be, like the molars appear to be normal. So, you know, the molars are good for grinding grain and stuff. But if you don't have canines, then that could suggest that they were had more of a plant-based diet than meat.
Interesting.
Mm. Yeah.
Well, I've always thought, maybe there is a other cross-cultural connection with these elongated sculptures beyond the Black Sea region, maybe into like India, and just that diet that makes me think of maybe the Indian vegetarian diets that go along with their religions. And we can talk about maybe some of the architecture, because that's basically what I do on my channels. I've kind of jumped off of what you've done with all of your photo taking and sightseeing, and I basically put together a running research catalog on all the little hallmarks of all architecture, and I'm seeing it in Peru, like you. I'm seeing it in Egypt, and surprisingly, I found a ton of it in India.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah, lots.
it's one of those places that we can't really go freely all over, and there's so many sites that are still like in a ruinous state that aren't preserved. But there are so many temples in India that could potentially show us some connections to this global culture. So,
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Well, if you know the YouTube channel Praveen Mohan, he still finds places to go to, which is amazing, because you don't find that in Egypt or Peru. Like all of the sites, ancient sites have been cataloged. There's nothing new to be found in Peru, but in India is so intense in terms of the number of temples, and he's done a fabulous job over the course of years of cataloging, that's all of that stuff. And Sri Lanka, of course, he's been to as well.
Oh, agreed. There's more in Sri Lanka as well. And the Rama Bridge,
yeah.
Rama Bridge itself is a very questionable piece of, architecture. So,
Well, even when I went to India, I went to Mahabalipuram, and it was like, basically the entire town. There's a designated place where there's megaliths, but there's like, if you go to the beach, there's tons that are just being taken by the sea on and off. Like there's temples all, there's no signs on anything. There's no designation of, there's no UNESCO basically over there. Like they don't really tell you what you're looking at or what you're seeing, or that this is special or not. But you can see littered megalithic stones and structures all over the entire town. So it's I think there was a lot more there than we know. So like, okay, what we wanted to know what your thoughts on particularly like the nubs were, or I've heard you call them knobs, but either way works. And because
I guess people use either term.
Okay, so what's your best guess at I guess, well, it doesn't even really matter what the function is, but I find it curious that they're found all over. They're found all over the world.
Yeah, that's true. Found in Turkey, they're found in India, they're found in Peru, they're found in Bolivia, they're found in Egypt, Lebanon, and on and on it goes. There's so many different theories about what they were for. The standard explanation by archaeologists is that they were used for attaching a rope underneath to lift them up, and that doesn't work, because actually I watched part of one of your videos earlier today, Andrew, and you were making the same point. They're rarely at the balance point.
Agreed.
They're usually off to the left or off to the right, or they're too small.
Oh, definitely.
Or there's no indentation underneath for the rope to be able to, hold on, to be able to pull it up, etc. And also the standard explanation as to why some of the biggest stones don't have them is that, at least in Peru, the archaeologists say, well, the Inca cut those off and polished them and didn't get around to cutting the rest off. It's like, that's not a good explanation.
No.
Another idea is that they're, if you want to get kind of wild, is that they were, because the stone was shaped while it was soft, as in that they're extrusion points of some kind, like you do with casting in plastic. Another theory is that they match alignments with the solstices and equinoxes, which is true, because there's an expert in Cusco that I met, and he showed me his booklet where he showed me some alignments, but it didn't take into account all of all the knobs, just a few of them.
Yeah,
So
I think I have that in your book, actually. I've got it bookmarked, but there's, yeah, just potential secondary functions after the fact that they might be uh, construction byproducts, like maybe softening the stone extrusion points or something like that. But after
mhm.
that, they had a reason for being after that fact, because they, like you said, they could have just taken them all off and made it a nicer looking aesthetic surface. But
Right.
they seem to follow like rules all around the world as well, in terms of where they're placed and
Mhm.
sometimes how many in the clusters. And one of the phenomenon seems to be foundations. So that tells me right away, it's a good way to find the real McCoys of the ancient sites, because if they have nubs along the foundations and megalithic polygonal stones,
Mhm.
that it's connected to this building process and this ancient lost high technology,
Yeah,
whatever it
no,
is.
that's a very good point. And you find them on the megalithic works in and around Cusco, which I think we can safely say is pre-Inca work, because the scale, the precision is very difficult to replicate today. And the Inca work is much inferior to that kind of work. But you don't find the knobs or nubs on the Inca construction, just on the stuff that appears to be far older, made of much more dense stone material like basalt.
Yeah, dense. Yeah, good point. Even though sometimes the blocks do get smaller, like inside the Coricancha, some
Mhm.
of those blocks still have nubs on them. So the smaller cellular work, you can just tell by the joinery a lot. Just the precision aspect of it is still the same regardless of the scale. And if it has nubs on it, that's kind of a good way to tell the real McCoys.
It's always interesting that they're on
Yeah, very
a
good
lot of
point.
the amphitheaters. Like they're on the in the seats uh in like Turkey and Greece. Like that's
Yeah.
always weird to me. And same thing with on sometimes they're on top of columns, and then sometimes they're at the bottom of columns, which I sort of have started thinking of them more as their amplification. Like they had something to do with like a speaker system, or I don't know. Like that's what I started thinking about them as.
Yeah,
But either
I
way,
think Brian says that in one of his books. I think in the Peruvian one, he says that, maybe he not don't know for sure, but energy, maybe energy, into the structure, or I think maybe energy onto this construction, some kind of divine energy is going on and, transferring through the structures. And maybe after the fact, they were energetic, for a long time. And these little nubs and like the Intihuatana, the hitching post of the sun, and there's
Mhm.
like the bedrock nub at Pisac, these might have been focal points for some kind of energy in one direction or the other.
Yeah, it could be, and it could be something as simple as solar energy collection. But
Passive energy. Yeah, yeah, could be.
well, yeah, and you brought up the Coricancha is a very profound building, because it's, the precision of its work is so precise, and there are no gaps in the stone from the front to the back.
Hmm.
So it appears that the whole building acted as if it was like one piece of, like it was meant to vibrate or resonate as a single block of stone.
Mm.
A lot of people say, well, it was for earthquake proofing, but earthquake proofing would be a side benefit from
Ah,
making something so profoundly uh, interlocking like that. So it's
yeah.
one of the most amazing structures in the world, not just in Peru, but
I agree that that's the way you say side benefit, because a lot of people will tell me, oh, well, the polygonal stones, that's for earthquake proof. But it's like, well, just saying earthquake proof doesn't explain all the development process involved in coming up with the design that is perfect for earthquake proof. Like that's a long development process. So
mhm.
when we see these sites kind of just fully formed in this perfected design, that speaks of some kind of lost knowledge.
No, very much so. And another interesting point is, with the Coricancha, every stone is a different shape and size. So
Mm.
they can, may be different by a centimeter in length or 2 centimeters. But that is a very odd way of building. Like that's not something, the way we approach building something. You want to have uniformity. So that further complements or complicates that structure by itself. And that, why would you make each one different? That makes it 100 times more complicated than using, a uniform shape and size.
Sure, sure. And
or
I
even
think,
like at Saxe Woman, how there's like you know, like a paw or like a snake. Like there's
Ah,
like
yeah.
designs within
Right.
the
Hmm.
stones. That's super complicated to do, and a lot of pre-thought about every single stone that's placed.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And one thing that's really neat about polygonal stonework is, it only goes together one way. So if it falls apart, if you had enough software or maybe just enough analytics on the stones, you could potentially jigsaw puzzle them back together if you had them all. Whereas in one of those bevel block structures or standard core structures or the cellular block structures, if those fall apart, they're like Legos. You can put those back, and archaeologists will probably get that wrong a lot of times. But with the polygonal nub architecture, you can almost, like putting teeth back into sockets. You can find the original location. I think the Gate of the Sun in Peru, where there's a few nubs on one of the sheer walls. I think there was some nubs that were on some blocks that fell down, but it looks like the restoration work found the original location for those blocks, put them back up, and they fit with the tight joinery. And it's like, that might be a piece of the puzzle, the piece of the code, or the piece of the message, or whatever the nubs are. It's finding a piece of that message and putting it back. And
Yeah.
one of my favorite examples of that is the Menkaure pyramid casing stones.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, yeah, you've seen those.
Hmm.
There's it in that kind of scenario, it almost looks like a message or code or some kind of technical information is going on along those casing stones.
No, that's another good point, and that's another theory that the knobs form some kind of yeah, like code
Mm.
of some kind. And we see multiple examples especially in Cusco, where you can tell that the Inca were trying to put some of these structures back together,
Mhm.
and they simply couldn't. They didn't bother trying, I don't think, to see where they would go. They were just kind of shove it into place and then use little bits of stone in order to fill the gaps, because it was so complicated that trying to replicate, you know, would take 21st century, computer technology to be able to map and then rebuild something like that. So that's a very good point.
Exactly, like they do with like the Parthenon and Greek sites and Turkish sites. And even like you said with Turkey has some really interesting polygonal stuff and standard course masonry. One of my favorite ones is a site called Catioren, and it has some amazing polygonal walls that, other than being more of a smooth surface instead of the puffy surface like you see in Peru, that
Mhm.
it's still very polygonal, very complex, but has a standard course corners. So it's like they could morph their technique, almost like they do in Peru at the Coricancha and Sacsayhuaman. They could morph their technique from polygonal to more of a standard cellular course, like on the fly, it seems.
Okay, so
Hmm.
besides nubs and like the polygonal thing, I mean, there are other hallmarks that are showing that there was like essentially cross globalization before they're saying, or there was a globalized civilization before they're telling us there was.
Agreed.
So I mean, I how do you conflate, or not, I don't know what the word is, but how do you justify the timelines not matching, or like this being uh the Peru stuff supposedly being 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, or and Göbekli Tepe being 11,000 years ago. Like with all these things that they do match, they do look like they were using similar building techniques. What do you think about the whole timeline thingy?
Well, that's a very complex question, but Göbekli Tepe is a good case in point, because they have, through radiocarbon testing, they have proven that it's at least 11,000 years old. But the construction technique is incredibly sloppy. I've been there,
Mm.
and it was good for half an hour. That was about it, because I don't see any great mystery. People go, "Oh my God, I have to see Göbekli Tepe." Well, it's worth seeing, but for me, it's
Right.
one of those places that's good to see once, because how it was built and the material it was made from isn't very complex. It's limestone. It's local. It wasn't moved over several miles to put into place. But then the timeline that we've been told of Egypt and Peru just don't make sense, because why, again, the standard story of Egypt, the greatest structures were the first ones built, like the Great Pyramids were built first, and then the quality of workmanship goes downhill. That's counter to basic logic. And then in Peru, they say that the Inca did this all with, copper chisels 500 to 1,000 years ago, which is impossible because you can't shape the stone with those tools. So we have to look at a much longer timeline. It appears, we know that there was this time period called the Younger Dryas about 13,000 to 12,000 years ago, where there were cataclysmic events that were felt all over the world, maybe even changed the axis of the planet, and
Right.
that created incredible destruction. So that's why a lot of us are thinking that these megalithic words are pre-cataclysmic, so they're older than 12,000. Based on the science of what the Younger Dryas discoveries have shown us.
Mm. And that makes me wonder with the, if like you say, with a shifted tilt or a shifted spin, could the conditions on Earth have been different to enable some of this architecture? Like some of the stuff I see in China, like Yangshan Quarry, China, that place is just fascinating. I mean, those stones are enormous. And one of the monoliths has nubs on it. And one of the other ones by itself in the quarry is one of the biggest, what appears to be quarried stones ever. And it's what's next to it is a big open void of quarry space where there must have been more of those at one time, and now they're not there. So I'm just seeing a ton of this quarry evidence, and we can talk about Aswan Quarry as well. A lot of material just missing, and then of course those objects themselves, the unfinished obelisk, the stone of the pregnant woman. I mean, even the moai on Easter Island. Some of these things are just they're amazingly enormous. So something in the conditions of us or the environment or both had to be different to even enable some of this stuff to be possible.
No, again, that's a great point about that. And the problem with all of these countries is that the governments refuse to accept that there was a culture older than them. So the Chinese are very hesitant to even accept the suggestion that there was someone more profound than, the Han Chinese people. The Egyptians refused to talk about anything before the first dynasty. In Peru and Bolivia, they refused to talk about anything older than Tiwanaku in Bolivia.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest problem we have, is that the academics will not budge. They will not look at the evidence, and it's staring them in the face. That's the frustration, is it's staring them in the face.
Agreed. Yeah.
The stuff becomes easier and easier to look at the more you look at it. And for them still to be so stubborn, is why I put my stuff on YouTube. I don't bother trying to discuss it with academics anymore, because they simply will not listen.
I get that. Yeah, we've been trying on Twitter lately, and it's kind of a futile effort because you get maybe 1 out of 100 interested minds that will, follow these concepts and do their own research and do the homework. And then most of the others are just arguing petty points and mainstream propaganda that they don't even know that well themselves. And you get a lot of unnecessary static trying to argue. But we think we have made some progress lately, off the backs of your work and other researchers' work with our free catalog. We're kind of just throwing that out there. We've kind of, slowed down on arguing the points, and we just want to show the evidence and maybe organize it to where people can understand them as connected hallmarks a little bit more. Another great one that you've pointed out and your wife has pointed out are these small filler stones, like the Coricancha, that tiny little filler stone. That is, it's very impressive. It's not there for any other reason than it's impressive and a signifier. And then you have it on an ahu at Easter Island, the exact same signature, if you want to call it, of a corner filler stone. And Silustani, Peru. I mean, if you put the one at Silustani, Peru next to the one at Easter Island, those look identical, like the exact same. The polygonal construction of the wall and the placement of the filler stone on the corner. And then we just went around the world with these corner filler stones. You find them in Persepolis, you find them in India, you find them in Egypt. I mean, it's another signifier that goes along with all this megalithic architecture.
Right.
So are the pinch holes, which are my favorite.
Yeah, that's like the newest phenomenon we've kind of found. And it's one of those, Brien, like you say with the nubs, it has a really banal mainstream excuse, which is it was for tying up animals for sacrifice, or it was for hanging tapestries and banners and awnings and canopies and things like that. But you start looking at these little loopholes or anchor holes or pinch holes, whatever you'd like to call them. You start looking into these, and first of all, the placements don't make sense, and then some of them look more advanced than others. You see them like at Tiwanaku. You see some really advanced, like precision corners, filler or corner pinches around some of the precision blocks there. But then you'll also see them in Bedrock, Cappadocia. I've seen them. Baalbek, I've seen them.
I just found some in Palenque.
Yeah, that's right. You found them on the steppe, and that's something you see in several places, including inside the step pyramid of Egypt. Jimmy from Bright Insight when he went in, the lighting was good, his camera was good, and he caught the edge of the top step going in, and it has one of these corner pinch holes in it. And I believe near Pisac, there's some doorways that have them. And then my favorite doorway, it's one of the most complicated doorways I've ever seen at the Cori Concha. We just refer to it as the special door or the door, but it's that door with, it's like a false door, but it's kind of broken, and it has all the little channels and holes around the perimeter on both sides. And what we think those might be the same phenomenon, these pinch holes. There's a temple in Turkey, Adada, and it's an amazing temple in its own right. It has nubs on one side, blocks that look like softened or puffy, like the Macaure funerary avenue. And then around its doorway, again, just like in Peru, it has these little pinch holes. And I believe I saw on one of your videos, Brian, when you went to Cappadocia, there was one doorway in the bedrock that had these weird pinch holes around the top of it. So I don't know what they are, the function. I think it might relate to high tech, or maybe an electrical or energy transfer again, or grounding for energy. But it rings true with all the nub sites and the filler stones and the megalithic architecture, the polygonal stonework. All these sites are rhyming in a sense.
And then there's my third favorite is scrape marks. I remember,
scoop marks and scrape marks. I mean, we have like a whole folder of just odd processing marks. We don't really know, how, everyone has a different name for them. Sometimes you say, this one looks like a spoon scrape, or a divot, or sometimes we'll say, oh, well, that looks like a nub, but it's in reverse, like an inverted nub. We've heard for like at the Serapeum, they're referred to as, areas where they've scooped out the cracks or the imperfections in the stone. So, there could be something to that with all of them around the world. But then you see them, and most curiously, you see them in the temples in Egypt, all along the columns, and sometimes all along the lower foundations of the temples. And the excuse for those, the mainstream excuse, is that either you had pilgrims or
knives or whatever.
You either have the pilgrims taking it for tinctures, for drinks, for religious purposes, healing purposes, or you would have the soldiers and invading forces, disrespectfully scraping their swords and knives and implements on the sides of the temples. And in both scenarios, I just don't see. I mean, it's a lot of effort. Some of the orientations they're not very conducive to sharpening something. And then you see these same marks in the quarries.
Yeah, well, they're pervasive everywhere. So it's
were these pilgrims going out to the quarries to get these, or were the soldiers going out there to sharpen their implements? And some of these marks look a lot like the ones you've shown at Petra in Jordan. So, again, a lot of these little echoes, they're rhyming all around the world.
Okay, so I don't know what to call these stones, but the ones that are like the ones I've recently been calling what the fuck boulders.
Just like Brian knows that in Peru, they're just the sacred bedrock formations,
like in Machu Picchu or
Napahuaca, right? There's that one, or some of them you're not sure if they're still connected to the ground or if they're loose boulders. But
what do you think about that element? That's because there seems to be some of those in, like, what's that place called, Bonobo, Italy, or
Bomarzo has some of that.
Italy has a bunch of them. Like they're all over India. They're just like the weird boulder that has like, you know, it looks like a Tetris game was played on it. Um,
Well, again, the standard idea from archaeologists that those were either areas where uh, the younger apprentices would go to test their skills. Or the other idea is that that's where stone was extracted from. But the shapes are never, again, it's never a common shape that's removed. Like you have these so-called staircases going up, but you don't find the stone has been put into place anywhere nearby. So I think they, based on the weathering patterns too, they're probably some of the oldest construction work, the bedrock shaping stuff, but that's a complete, you know, that's a complete mystery. Luckily, I've had geologists with me and looking at the surfaces, and again, standard academics say that that's during Inca times, and so I've asked them, would this be hundreds of years or thousands? And they've all said thousands upon thousands of years of weathering would cause that kind of effect on what originally would have been probably quite a precise surface. So again, it doesn't fit the standard timeline of what the academics are talking about.
I could see that. Yeah, some of the interiors of the temples in Peru, they still remain very precise, and they've been shielded from some of the weathering. And you can get that impression on some of these with lazy stones and like the Saihuite blocks, these just weird boulders have cuts in them. And I mean, some spots like Kilo Rumiak, that bedrock carving, that's in pretty good shape. And some of these other spots, they've retained some precision. You can tell that they maybe like originally like a Ollante Tambo, I believe, in the bedrock, there's that cross hatching pattern, you know. And I think at Sacsayhuaman there might be more of that, but it's like that was done very precise. You know, some kind of high loss technology did that for sure.
and while I can see the whole like it could be apprentice this or that, but there's still some sort of like they're close enough where you, like in a connoisseur eye you can kind of go like they're related, or there's elements about them enough that you kind of lump them with similarities of other ones. So that's always very, like, I just don't know where to place those. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just like they do seem primordial and like fundamental and primary. And then like Ben at Uncharted X has mentioned that it looks like some of the cellular block work might have venerated or protected some of that weird bedrock work. Like Tambo Mache has a really interesting kind of melted bedrock element, but it looks like it's been shored up or venerated or protected by the block work. So I mean, yeah, there could be, like, you got to stretch that timeline out. There could be generations of this presence and this process, this project, and you know, coming back around after maybe generations of neglect and abandonment too. Especially with the connections with Turkey. I mean, it really makes you wonder with the travel possibilities. You know, could they have just had Peru as like a secret spot that they came to, and then maybe they would go back into the old world and mingle with the rest of civilization, and then maybe every few generations they would return to their secret homeland and maybe restore the cities a few more times. And it seems like Machu Picchu and some of these other sites have, you know, an intermediate stage where it's like you say, Brian, it's not quite the megalithic work, but I think it's a little bit better than Inca work. It's like the blocks get smaller, the precision starts to go away, but you know, they still spent a lot of time sculpting these blocks, and maybe they had a remnant of the process or the technology left, and it was just fading and dwindling.
Well, the Inca did, of course, you know, they did have you know, for what tools they had to work with, they did have master masons who were quite good at working with large blocks of stone and fitting them together quite well. But it's not the same as the older stuff where you can see much higher level of precision than that, you know, almost basically next door to one another.
Yeah.
So Machu Picchu is, you know, it's a curious case because somebody obviously chose that location and cut the top of the mountain off in order to shape the city. Because all of the mountains in that area are dome shapes. So somebody had to come and almost, this would be an Ancient Aliens episode, but shear the mountaintop off in order to be able to create flat surfaces to even start with. And then the core of Machu Picchu is clearly the oldest, and it is megalithic. And then all of the Inca work, which is 95%, was built around the discovery of this very, very ancient site.
Right. Yeah. I think that's another echo around the world is you see the core of most,
Yeah.
ancient areas is a megalithic core. So if you're hunting for that kind of architecture, go to the core of the city and find one of the oldest temples, and you'll probably find nubs on it and the polygonal stonework and these other related hallmarks. And eventually you almost get to just where you can see the architecture. It's just that style, and more than likely you can almost predict the hallmarks are going to be there.
Right. Well, that's a very good, I think in almost, if not every case, almost every case, it is the center or the core that is the megalithic part that was discovered and then built. Find that at Baalbek, at least the Baalbek site itself, not the quarry, but and all over Peru and Bolivia. And then you see, in some cases, again, you see cataclysmic damage mainly on the western surfaces of the structures, because all of the ones in Peru have physical damage to them that was not done by an invading army or someone. It was some kind of incredible heat or force coming from the eastern side, striking the western surfaces. In some cases, at Silistani, you see vitrified, melted stone on the western surfaces. So clearly some intense heat struck locations like that. Also at Karnak in Egypt, you see that on the western surfaces, where there's much more damage on the west side than there is on the east or south or north sides.
So, and I think I've also seen Huaytara. It's the church in Peru that's been converted by the Spanish, and I think I've seen some discoloration and scorching of some kind. We call them scorch marks whenever we see that kind of discoloration, and
right.
Yeah, I think it's really apparent there at Huaytara.
And it is.
Of course, Tanis as well, right?
Oh, Tanis.
Or Elephantine Island, or
Elephantine as well. Yeah.
I mean, what do you think what's your best guess? Are you team multiple asteroid meteorite strikes, or are you team like coronal mass ejection? Or
actually all of the above. I think there was if you look at the work of I've forgotten his name at the moment. But it seems like the black hole in the center of our galaxy actually, at certain periods of time, actually can fill up and then erupt and eject material and energy out from it, which travels across the galactic plane. Dr.
Robert
sorry?
Schoch? Is that Robert?
No, Robert Schoch is the coronal plasma
coronal
ejection theory.
Oh, okay.
Or the solar
this is from the Galactic Center.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think I think that is plausible, and his name escapes me at the moment, but the theory is that every 13,000 years there is an eruption from galactic center that sends out energy that travels across the galactic plane. It's possible that ties in with Robert Schoch's idea, in that this energy could have gone through the sun and caused an ejection of plasma that would strike the surface, as well as collecting meteorites or comets along its course of movement, causing them to maybe strike the Earth or that kind of thing.
I could see that. I think in those kind of terms as well. Like it's something in the biblical realm. Like we're talking, multiple forms of cataclysm, to explain all the different eccentricities of the events that are recorded in the ancient texts.
And also over the course of 1,000 years, like it wasn't like a one-day event.
Good point. Right.
Like different patterns of activity that could have happened.
Right. Yeah. And I always wonder how natural events could inspire some of these, divinity and godly stories. And but then you also see this architecture that is in its own right, divine and godly in its execution. So I think there's some kind of overlap between the natural cataclysm and then also some kind of advanced influence, either here all the time or other world origins. I'm open to really either at this point, because I mean, with the elongated skulls, that's something that kind of throws a wrench in everything and is out of left field. And it's like, oh, so there's a whole nother type of human that we could have responsible for a lot of this architecture that hasn't been recorded in any of the textbooks, and we haven't learned about it in school. So
So I went to this place in Colombia called Musca. It was the Musca tribe or something. Can't remember if that was the name of the town, but it was like where the legend of the Cortez's like golden fountain or something came from. And anyway, their little local museum had 700 of these skulls, and they would not let you take your phone inside, or they would not let you use your phone, and they were very monitoring it, and they didn't want any pictures of it online or blah blah blah. And but they were all like, their skulls were all like, they were like a normal human size. They weren't elongated, but they had the like two bulbs, like two lumps on all of them, and like in front of them. And it was very similar to
bilateral protrusion.
Yeah, and when you took one of the elongated skulls and you put it in a certain angle, the one that has the hump, like the
Right.
The forehead.
the back has like the two little lumps on it. Well,
Right.
that same sort of thing was all over those. And I mean, that's in Colombia. It's not that far from Peru, but
Wow.
I just wonder how much stuff there are. I mean, and I was like, this is amazing. You should tell everybody. And they were like, tell nobody. Oops. But I mean, it's just like one of those things where I wonder how much we don't even still know about, like within skeletal remains of old stuff.
Well, or are not allowed to see. Like there was a Canadian filmmaker who went to Peru in the 1990s because Peru was going through this Maoist rebellion of terrorists. And so in order to restore faith in tourism, this Canadian filmmaker was brought there in order to make films for the government about how wonderful Peru is, and and all the beautiful stuff. And so the president met up with him and said, do you have any, we're so thankful for this work you're doing. Do you have any requests that I can help you with? And he knew about the elongated skulls. And he said, I'd like to see what you have in the warehouse with the elongated skulls. And he supposedly was given access. I've never been given access, but he was given access, and he went inside. And he said there were some that were at least twice the size of a normal human skull, like not 20 or 30%, but like this big.
Wow.
And the president said, would you like to take one home? And filmmaker said, well, I think that's illegal, but could you have a copy of one made for me? And he's got it in his house in Ontario, and it is twice the size of a normal human being. So it's what they're hiding away from the public, like in Colombia, as you were saying, and in Egypt, etc. That's the most curious thing. Have to hope that they'll start opening the stuff up to the general public in the future. But yeah, it's the unknown, the inaccessible stuff that I want access to.
Agreed. Yeah. And other cultures too. I think there's like some gold wizards caps. And they're really long, almost like just a metal stereotypical wizard's hat. And you think, well, long hat for a long head. And then you see some of that in India as well. Some of their gods and portrayals of gods have very tall hats and embellished hats.
Well, all of them, like the Pope's hat.
Need a beer, Glenn? Does the Pope wear a funny hat? Yeah, Glenn, I guess it is kind of funny.
Yeah, the Pope.
Yeah,
right. The Pope's hats. You see that if you go into the Vatican Museum, you see the hats. You see the sculptures done where the heads are like very, very big, much bigger than normal. And you'd think, well, is it hiding a head that's the same size?
Yes, exactly. And some of the Phrygian stuff, the Phrygian stuff, they have the caps that kind of flop over the front. And it's like, maybe are they carrying over somehow? Are they the regular skull people still wearing the the clothing of the elongated skull people or
Oh,
something.
and even ancient Egyptians, like crowns were very,
Right,
Oh
exactly.
but
yeah.
I think it's where I get a little bit conspiratorial, but I don't think that you build Saxe woman and then you just go and you die from a cataclysm. I think these people like are in breakaway civilizations. I think they live under the ground or in the oceans or in Antarctica or somewhere. They're already here. I think that whoever built the megaliths is also the UFO people. That's just, I know that that's complete, just like theory crazy, but I don't know. I don't feel like, I don't feel like they're completely gone.
Mm.
And yeah, I don't know why I feel that way, but I've always felt like that. I'm like, yeah, something of all this doesn't add up.
Mm-hmm.
What's your goals, Brien? Like, what are you trying to do going forward, researching and stuff? What's your aim?
I wouldn't say I necessarily have an aim. The good thing about Egypt is that more stuff is opening up to, stuff that was inaccessible is becoming accessible.
Mhm.
So that's good. Like this, I've been under the step pyramid at Saqqara twice now, and there is a central shaft that goes pretty far down. And then if
They
you
let you go
access
in
the,
it?
yeah, they do. They do now.
Mm-hmm.
And then now you can access the north side, which takes you down deeper. And Ben of Uncharted X was in there. He made a couple of films about that. And
That's right.
there were like 6 miles of tunnels underneath the step pyramid. So obviously the step pyramid was built on top of something super that they found was super sacred.
Sure. And
So
that's what
that's
that giant box, that multi-megalith box down there,
right.
whatever that was, I think that was obviously part of it. And I think there's another southern pyramid that has another version of that, maybe a slightly smaller version. But it's like Lincoln logs with these giant ashlar blocks. And they built some kind of, I guess you could call it a coffer or a chain, a box. Of course,
Mhm.
we have one piece boxes all over Egypt. And that was one thing I was going to bring up to you, Brien, is do you see any kind of reasoning for there to be a lack of boxes, say in Peru? We have megalithic boxes, that follow all the other architecture all over the world, but we don't have the big, sarcophagi in Peru as much. I mean, almost at all. I mean,
Seraphim boxes or kind of thing.
we have Bakal's sarcophagus lid, and yeah, that's impressive, but we don't have the number of burial chambers, coffers, whatever you want to call them. We don't have nearly as many in Peru as we would anywhere else.
No, but you do in Turkey. If you go to the Central
Sure.
Museum in Istanbul, like the museum there, they've got
That's
these
right.
massive things made out of stone called rhyolite that I think came from Egypt. And they're, 100 tons in size. Of course, again, they say, well, this was from, the 5th century BC made for so-and-so. It's like, no, this stuff was recycled. It's all recycled.
Mm-hmm.
There are columns inside the Vatican Library that were brought from Egypt, obviously, because they're single piece.
Sure.
Also, the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, there are these giant rhyolite columns made of one piece that clearly were brought in from Egypt as well. So you have all this recycling stuff that went on
Sure.
in
Sure.
different places. But no, that's a very good point. In Peru, you simply have these, these megalithic walls and stuff like that, but you don't have anything made of stone of a scale like the Serapeum boxes or anything like that.
No. And also columns. That's another thing you don't see too much of is, like you say, the single piece columns. The only kind of advanced looking columns I've seen in Peru is at like Chavin de Hontar has
Right.
small short ones, and they have some interesting inscriptions on them and everything. But and then I think there's the 1,000 pillar hall. I think it's in Mexico. Is it Tulum or somewhere? Um, but you have uh, an echo of it, but not nearly the extent as anywhere else in the world. Everywhere else in the world, you have lots of column drum segments and single piece columns and all this. But especially in India, you have those impressive lathe turned columns.
Oh yeah. Oh
but
yeah.
but not too much column work in Peru. So
No, that's a good point.
just an interesting lack of an echo, whereas other places it seems to echo in almost every other way. So
Mhm.
maybe one of the ways that Peru might be special, or more primary, or primordial. Who knows?
Yeah, well, it's still my belief that whoever did the work in Peru was not the same that were in Egypt, because the approach is very different. Egypt is very logical and linear.
Hmm.
Peru's very playful.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
left brain versus right brain. And then I think whoever built Pumapunku and Tiwanaku was a separate
Hmm.
culture as well. And then whoever was on Easter Island as well with the giant moai, you have two sizes of moai. You've got the ones up to 30 feet tall, then you have ones that are about
Sure.
6 feet tall. So the short ones were clearly made by the Easter Islanders, but they discovered Easter Island with the giant moai there and tried to, it's always a game of replication or attempted replication.
Yeah. I actually, we were talking about that with some of our group the other day, and I thought that's almost like a reason for the sites to exist, beyond any other purpose they had. It's just, it's an ideal for all the local population to strive for, just by putting the ruined structure back together. You're learning about how to, build these structures, and then you copy them and try to, do your best to get the quality as good as they did. And
Mhm.
it's like, just by them existing and you growing up around these structures, it's almost like it furthers evolution and of civilization, in a passive positive way.
Mhm.
So
Well, Brien, I know got to be conscious of your time. It's almost up. Is there anything you have coming up, like some tours that are going to be popping off, like your new book? Anything you need to?
Yeah, we've got a tour next month in Peru, which is good. Bolivia's become problematic, especially for Americans. They've installed a visa process that is very complicated and very expensive. So I don't know when I'll be going to
Pumapunku.
back to Bolivia again with a group. And then in November, we have another tour in Peru, and possibly Bolivia, which is already sold out, which is good. And then in April of next year, I'm going back to Egypt again for the 9th time. So I'll get to access a few sites I haven't been able to see before. The megalithic ones have opened up in the last year. They've also will have the new giant largest museum in the world
that's
open
right.
in Egypt, the GEM. So that'll be good. And I'll continue going to Egypt probably once a year if there's something that I get to see that I haven't seen before.
Mhm.
But aside from that, I'd like to go to Egypt once at some point. But again, it's not that COVID is a problem anymore. And I think you're allowed to talk about it on YouTube now, but it's not that it's a problem. It's the fear that people still have that it's a problem. A friend of mine has a tour supposed to be starting tomorrow in Egypt, and he's only got 8 people,
Mm.
to be on his tour. And he's got 4 other guest hosts that are on it. So,
Mm.
Well, then there's also like BS like testing that if you don't get that right, or you could get the whole
oh,
thing.
I know. Yeah,
There's
there's all that.
yeah.
I think at least, well, Peru's almost back to normal now. Not quite, but almost. But it's it's foreigners' fear of traveling in general that is still causing a lot of problems all over the planet. So I'm hoping within a year all of this will be gone, and that'll be the end of it, because we've had 2 years of this now, and it's enough.
Yeah. Agreed.
I just got back from Mexico, and it was like I felt like it was 2019 there and back. I mean, I had to take a COVID test to get back into the US, but they didn't even
Right.
check. Like they didn't
No,
even
they didn't?
ask me to look at my stuff. And I was just like, you're telling me I had to like go through all that crap to get it, and then you're not even going to look at it? Which is, I mean, but yeah, they didn't even care. They were just like, hey, welcome home. Go through.
Well, yeah, no, there's a map you can look at the site is called iata.com, I think it is. And it's the world map, and it shows you what countries are open. And
Okay.
Mexico's been open since January 1st, I think. You
Yeah.
don't need anything. But I check that map once a day just to see what countries are are opening up in order to look at the possibility of where to go. India, as I said, I'd like to go to, but
Yeah.
that's at least a year or two away before that, before that becomes, I think,
I mean, I had a tour to Malta that got canceled, and they're still like pretty closed. I mean,
yeah, I've heard that. I have a friend who went there about a month ago, and she said Malta was kind of problematic.
yeah. So
Well,
I don't know. I hope it all ends like really quickly too. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And if India does open up, I would definitely like to get on board one of those tours, because there's thousands of temples. And I heard we follow a couple Twitter accounts that are all about restoring and finding these temples in India. And I think a survey found like another 1,000 just, that are either under Muslim occupation, that they've been converted into mosques and other things, or just lost to the jungle and the desert. So some really good ones there that I'd like to see is Warangal.
Oh, yeah.
Praveen has shown that one. And then probably the best one for nubs is the Brihatishwara temple, which is like Tamil Nadu's greatest, oldest temple. And then one side of this is just completely covered in these nubs, and the entrance has these nubs all around the archway. And just, there must be something pivotal and crucial to the nub language or nub expression there in India. And maybe it's in pockets in India, there might be some surviving mentions on these walls that, correlates to the artwork, to where we could, like you do with the hieroglyphs, you could put together some more of the narrative of how the process was done and who was involved.
Yeah, good point.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Brian. This was really great. Thank you.
Yes.
Sure.
Thank you very much. I hope to go on one of these tours soon, if, like you say, these restrictions calm down. And if you go back to Egypt, I can't wait to see more of like the Osiris shaft. At the very bottom, I know it's full of water, but what an enigmatic place that is, with that box and those other tunnels that go off down there. It just makes you wonder. So anywhere you can get in with special permissions, anything
Yeah,
we can do,
exactly.
anything we can do with Patreon or whatever to help with that. I'd love to see some more new stuff. Like you, I'd like to go to these places, but if it's not to see new stuff, I'm not as interested.
Yeah, no, exactly. I've been to Egypt 8 times, and it's been great, but unless there's more to look at, it's kind of, it starts to get, I've been to Machu Picchu 90 times, and it starts to get redundant after a while. So I restrict how much traveling I do, not just because again, waiting for things to open up more. But Peru's close to being normal now.
That's good.
But not quite there.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate the Tombs of the Nobles footage you've gotten recently in Egypt, because at Tombs of the Nobles, you see bedrock nubs.
Oh, yeah.
So like in the bedrock, there you go. You can't really get much more foundational than that. So what a great spot that is.
Great point.
So, well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. So,
Yeah,
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.